Okay, so in today's video we're going to be looking at how to get planning permission for new housing, and specifically we're going to be looking at how to get planning permission for some garages. Quite often I see people asking, how do you get permission for housing on garages? So particularly like garages at the end of a terrace, say, that aren't necessarily used anymore, and they're looking at developing them. So this video is going to be looking at the way to get planning permission for that. And it's going to start off with the 3 key steps that you need to look at before you even think about buying the site, and way before you submit an application. And this isn't just true of garages, but just true of anything, so it's applicable across all sites that you're looking at submitting an application for. And then after you do that, 4 kind of key steps that you need to take to submit the application and give you the best chance of getting permission for that site. Because so much time can be wasted by not doing these things, and quite often it happens throughout planning departments. A lot of people don't go through these steps, and it just means that they either get refused or they spend ages at appeal, and it just wastes everyone's time. So hopefully this video will help someone that's looking at garages with the potential of developing it for housing. So let's now look at the 3 steps that you need to take before you even consider buying that site or even submitting an application. So the first 3 key steps that you need to take to get planning permission for new housing on garages sites are these 3 things that I'm about to list out that are true of any site that you want to develop, not just for housing but anything. They're the fundamentals of planning, and they're also the 3 steps that the local authority and a planning officer take to make sure that something's acceptable. So you just do the same things that they do, make sure you get some green flags, and that'll give you the best chance of getting permission for something. So the first thing is, and they don't have to be in order, but the first thing is to check the planning history. Every council has a search engine that gives you details of any application that was submitted on any site in the borough, and so that, or the borough or the local authority or area that you're in, and that will give you details of any applications that have been submitted. So if you see something on there for garages and someone has already come up with the idea to develop it for housing, and you find out there's a refusal and it's also been turned appeal, then that's a massive red flag. If there's nothing there, then there's nothing there. It's quite common, and then that's the kind of indicator of moving on to the second step. Going back to the appeal though, it may not necessarily be a complete red flag. Just check the issues and the reasons why it was turned down. There may be a chance to overcome it. So that's where a real analysis of that application comes in. So then moving on to the second step is to check the planning policy. Now every council, some of them can be quite generic, but some of them can be very specific depending on the council. And then also, generally speaking, all councils have policy that speak to guidance. And when you're developing sites for housing, in particular on sites like garages, if that local authority has a particular abundance of garages, terraces say, they may well have some guidance on specifically how to develop them. So have a look at that. And then the issues you want to kind of be looking for are, does the council need housing? I can tell you right now, yes, they need housing. And then you want to figure out what's the housing mix, what ideal of mix do they want? So what size of housing? What do they want in terms of parking? What do they want in terms of amenity space, so back gardens? And also then going into design, you'll need to check the local area to find out what would be acceptable in terms of scale, materials, and then the key one for developing garages in particular, which can scupper most sites like this, is to check the amenity. The amenity policies are quite generic, but again the guidance might be there. And what they talk about are things like overlooking enclosure, overshadowing, these things, noise issues, and they're very important to making sure that housing is acceptable. And the reason why this is the most important issue is because housing that has been developed with garages on the side, generally speaking, they were designed with this issue in mind. So overcoming amenity is really, really important. So that's where a good architect comes in to figure out those, to unpick that puzzle. And then the last thing is to do a site visit. Google Street View is great, and especially if you can have a 3D view, but nothing really beats actually going on site and getting an appreciation of the distances, the scale of the area, the quality of the design, the materials, and any other issues that will be picked up by going on site that you may not have picked up just through doing a desk search. So those are the kind of 3 key steps that any application goes through. Check the planning history, check the planning policy, and then check the site and surroundings to see what might be acceptable. And if you do those 3 things, then you've given yourself a good basis for getting planning permission. So once you've done that, you then go, you've got some green flags, and then you can go ahead to the next point of either buying the site and then going ahead and submitting an application, and that's what we'll be talking about next. So the first step of submitting an application that will give you the best chance of getting planning permission for new housing is, it sounds simple and obvious, but submitting a good application. So many applications that local authorities deal with are just refused based off of poor information. You can't understand it. You don't actually know what they're applying for. It's a ridiculous proposal that's completely unacceptable in the local area, and quite often applicants know that, and they'll submit applications thinking that the council will say, okay, well that's not good enough, but you could bring it down, you get planning permission for that. That doesn't happen anymore. The council and officers particularly don't have the time to be designing things for you, so they will just refuse it straight off, and that will just waste so much time. So submitting a good application comes with being very clear on the application forms, what you're applying for, and then the drawings are very, very important. So the drawings are complete drawings. Don't hide anything, because it will just come up once you submit the application. It will just come up. You'll get asked about, and local people will look at the drawings as well, and if they can't understand it, they'll object, and they'll look for reasons to scupper your proposal given any opportunity. So submitting good drawings is key. Submitting good application forms is key. And then anything you want to submit, depending on the type of application, anything else you want to submit that helps to clearly explain the application. So a good statement that clearly sets out things like, so if we're dealing with housing, your statement will say stuff like, we're demolishing the garages, we're going to be building a 2-story house with a pitched roof in place of it. It's going to be a 4-bed house with a back garden. It's going to have parking. It's going to have amenity space. It's going to have windows that don't overlook. It's going to be, and then you explain why the design is acceptable on the local street scene. Use of materials, how it's appropriate for the local area. So all these things, if you can just clearly set out, you can bullet point it, it doesn't matter. The clearer it is for a planning officer to read, the better, and then you're onto a good winner. So submitting a good application is the first step to getting planning permission for new housing. So then the second step, once you've submitted the application, you've gone through the validation process, your application is now live. So now the public can look at your application. They'll start reviewing plans. And depending on your local area, you'll have different levels of kind of scrutiny. Some local areas your neighbours will really analyse your drawings and they'll object, and you'll get lots of objections. Very few people support, I'll say that. So don't be worried if people object, it's just a matter of course. But what does really help is once people start objecting to your application, don't leave it for the officer to figure out whether or not these the objections can be overcome. It really does help if so once the application process has started, and the consultation process is a 3-week process. Once that 3-week period is over, people can object whenever they want, but the formal consultation process is 21 days. Once that 21 days is over, go onto the application website or ask the officer if you can get hold of them, get all the consultation responses, list them out, and then I would write a statement in response to them, so that you can then explain if they're objecting on things like, this is going to overlook my back garden, and then you can say it's not going to overlook my back garden for these reasons, and this is how we've designed it. And anything they object to, just respond to it, because you want to give the officers very easy opportunity for them to just go, okay, it's fine for these reasons, and just tell the truth about it. We've designed it acceptably to make sure that it fits in with the local street scene, and it's, the amenity impacts are fine. So responding to consultation responses is really, really important. So once the consultation period is over, this is the point you can start asking the officer how you think the application is going, to varying levels of degrees. You might get a response from the officer, you might not. But it's at this point to start talking to the officer to figure out what are the types of conditions they're thinking of adding. So for a new house, it might be particularly in London, everywhere needs kind of cycle storage. So if you have external cycle storage, like an outdoor bin and stuff like that, an outdoor refuse area, they might ask for a condition for details of that. Try and submit something. You can ask if they'll accept an amended drawing that will send the details of that, because what you want is basically a planning permission that's got very little to do after it. All the conditions after it make it an even longer process to sort out. So if you can talk to the officer and find out what conditions they're thinking of adding, you can try and head them off at the pass. And like I think it has to be related to minor things, so like details of cycle storage or details of refuse, or some, depending on the council, they might ask for details of materials. You might not be able to submit that to certain councils, it depends, but the key is to basically ask them as much as you can, try and speak to them. I know how hard this is, so I'm aware of the issues, but in an ideal world, talk to your officer as much as possible and just try and get clear on exactly what they'll need, and try and head off anything at the pass so that you can have a planning permission at the end that has very little to do after you get planning permission. So the last thing for getting planning permission for new housing is you've gone through that step of asking the officer, of checking the conditions. The last thing is you've got planning permission. The last thing you need to do straight away, immediately, is to read the planning decision, make sure the description of development is exactly as it's meant to be, but also the key thing is to check the drawing numbers. So checking the drawing numbers against all so these are the approved drawings. This then becomes like a legal binding thing. So check every single drawing number to make sure they tally up with the ones that you've submitted. If there's anything wrong with them, go back to the officer straight away, because if you don't build something in accordance with the drawings that you've submitted, then you're open to essentially enforcement action. So getting this clear is really, really important. And then the other thing is to check the conditions. If you've spoken to the officer already and found out that they weren't going to add a condition on, say, cycling details or anything like that, but then there is one, go straight back to the officer and say, this shouldn't be on there and these are the reasons why, this is what I submitted to you. Because it could be an honest mistake, it's quite common. So just straight away, as soon as you get the permission, check it through thoroughly, make sure everything is right, and go back to the officer with any issues that you might have, and get that sorted as quickly as you can, because the longer you leave it, the less of a priority it becomes for the officer. So you just have to be on it straight away. So those are the 4 steps. So those 4 steps are the best ways of getting planning permission for new housing on a garage site like that. So just running through them again: submitting good and clear information, absolutely critical. And then once you get the application validated, keep your eye on the consultation responses, respond to anything that comes up, and then as the application is progressing, talk to the officer as much as you can. Again, I know that's difficult sometimes, but talk to the officer as much as you can, find out how they think the application is going, and try and find out if they're thinking of adding any conditions and try and head them off at the pass. And then lastly is to double check everything once you get the planning permission, to check all the drawings, to check all the conditions are right, and then hopefully you have planning permission for new housing on a garage site. So those are the 4 steps. I hope you found this useful. If you want to hear any other case studies like this, please put it in the comments below and I'll be glad to do them more. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the video, and I'll see you on the next one.